Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis,
Yeah.
there's this expectation of absolute precision.
Oh, definitely. Like 100%.
Right, like you fall down, your arm hurts, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points and says, there it is. There's the fracture. Broken or not broken.
It's comforting, really. It's comforting because it's binary, you know?
Okay.
We inherently want complex problems to have these visible singular causes. I mean, it gives us an illusion of control.
An illusion of control, yeah. But then you step into the world of historical systems failure, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just, well, it's completely broken.
Yeah, you're looking at mud.
Right, we're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky. And that murky landscape is exactly what we are decoding today for you.
And we're using a really fascinating document for this, dated April 24, 2026, simply titled Fall of the Western Roman Empire.
Yeah, and we should clarify right up front, we aren't here to just memorize dates or list off ancient battles.
Yeah.
That's not the mission of this deep dive.
No, not at all. We are going to look at the collapse of Rome as a masterclass in systems failure.
Right. We're treating this as an autopsy of how complex structures, whether that's a global empire, a multinational corporation, or even the psychological architecture inside your own mind, how they slowly drift out of alignment and just break down.
It's so applicable to everything.
It really is. Okay, let's unpack this. To set the stage, we have to define our terms. Because when people casually mention the fall of Rome, they're usually missing like half the map.
Oh, easily half, at least.
Right, so we are specifically looking at the Western Roman Empire today.
Yeah, and that geographical distinction is, it's the first major piece of context you need.
Because it wasn't just one big blob that all fell at once.
Exactly. At its peak, the Roman Empire was unimaginably vast. I mean, stretching from the rain-swept hills of northern Britain all the way down to the sands of Egypt.
And across into the Middle East, right?
Yeah, across the Middle East, it was simply too large for a pre-industrial society to govern from a single city.
Without phones or the internet? I mean, how could you?
You couldn't. So by 395 AD, the empire was officially split into two administrative halves.
Right.
The Eastern Roman Empire, which was based in Constantinople, was wealthier, far more urbanized, and remarkably stable.
And that half didn't fall.
No, it survived for another 1,000 years, eventually becoming what we call the Byzantine Empire.
Which honestly challenges our whole perception of this era. 1,000 more years of Roman continuity.
It's crazy to think about.
It really is. It means the system itself wasn't inherently doomed.
Precisely. The system could survive if the underlying conditions supported it. But our focus today is on the other half, the Western Roman Empire.
Well, one that didn't make it.
Right. This territory included Italy, Gaul, which is modern-day France, Britain, Spain, and North Africa.
And from what the source says, this was the agrarian, less wealthy, less populous half, right?
Yeah, it was far more vulnerable. And this is the half that suffered the catastrophic collapse culminating in that symbolic date of 476 AD.
Symbolic date. We will definitely get back to that later because that's a huge myth we need to bust.
Oh, we will absolutely bust that. But what's fascinating here is that we often carry this cinematic Hollywood image of societal collapse.
Like explosions and fire everywhere.
Exactly. We picture a sudden dramatic explosion, a single cataclysmic event where barbarians kick down the gates and civilization just turns off like a light switch.
Like an alien invasion movie.
Right. But the source material we are analyzing today demands we abandon that image entirely.
So what does it actually look like then?
Collapse is not a sudden destruction. I mean, it is a gradual, insidious loss of resilience.
Insidious. I like that word for this.
It is. It's a structure slowly, almost invisibly weakening over centuries until it just cannot support its own weight.
So it's not a bomb going off. It's termite damage.
Termite damage on a continental scale, yeah.
Man, okay. To understand how a structure that massive collapses, we really have to understand how it was built in the first place.
You have to know the baseline.
Right, we have to look at the machine at its absolute peak. In the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, this system was an absolute marvel of cohesion.
Truly a marvel.
Our source outlines 5 distinct pillars that created this empire. Let's walk through them, starting with the political structure.
Sounds good.
I'm looking at the centralized authority, but the source emphasizes how flexible it was. I mean, how do you govern 50 million people across 3 continents before the invention of the telegraph?
Well, you do it through a brilliant, pragmatic balancing act.
Okay, how so?
The emperor in Rome held ultimate, absolute authority. He commanded the military and dictated macro policy. But the Romans understood that micromanaging a province 1,000 miles away was impossible.
Just because of the speed of communication, right?
Exactly. It would take weeks to get a letter anywhere. So they relied on immense local delegation. The empire was divided into provinces ruled by governors, and those provinces were subdivided into local city-states, or civitates.
So if I'm a local elite in Gaul, I'm not waiting for a letter from the emperor to fix a pothole or settle a local trade dispute.
Not at all. The local elites handled the day-to-day administration, the tax collection, and the minor judicial issues.
That makes a lot of sense.
The overarching political genius was offering these local elites a stake in the system.
Like incentivizing them to play along.
Exactly. Rome essentially said, keep order, pay your taxes, supply troops, and we will back your local authority with the might of the Roman legions.
That is quite the backup to have.
It was. It created a highly effective hierarchy that didn't buckle under the weight of its own bureaucracy.
That plays right into the second pillar, which is the economy. The source describes the Mediterranean Sea not as a barrier, but as a superhighway.
Yeah, the entire basin functioned as an integrated, unified economic zone.
It was essentially an ancient free trade zone, wasn't it?
Pretty much. Because the Romans controlled all the shores of the Mediterranean. I mean, they literally called it Mare Nostrum, which means our sea. They eradicated piracy for centuries.
Wow. Centuries without pirates.
Yeah, which allowed for incredibly cheap, bulk maritime transport. You had massive cargo ships, called corpitus, moving hundreds of tons of grain from the fertile Nile Delta in Egypt directly to the port of Ostia in Italy.
Just to feed the capital.
Just to feed Rome, yeah.
Yeah.
You had olive oil from Spain, wine from Gaul, pottery from North Africa, and silver from Britain, all flowing through this interconnected network.
There's that physical evidence in Rome, right? What's it called? Monte Testaccio?
Yes, Monte Testaccio. It is a literal mountain in Rome made entirely of broken, discarded olive oil amphorae.
Wait, amphorae. Those are the ancient shipping containers, right?
Exactly, the big clay jars, mostly imported from Spain and North Africa. It's an artificial hill that stands as a staggering testament to the sheer volume of their integrated supply chain.
A mountain of trash that proves how rich they were.
Basically, yeah. But we must also acknowledge the dark engine of this economy.
Right, it wasn't all just fair trade and olive oil.
No, a foundational component was slave labor. The Roman economic model heavily depended on a continuous influx of enslaved people captured during military conquests.
And they needed them to work the massive agricultural estates and mines?
Exactly. This reliance, as we'll see, became a fatal trap later on.
Which brings us to the third pillar. Social cohesion. And this is where Rome did something totally unprecedented for an ancient empire.
It really was revolutionary for the time.
Historically, when an empire conquered a territory, they just subjugated the people and extracted wealth until the locals eventually rebelled, right?
But that was the standard playbook, yeah.
But Rome used citizenship as an assimilation tool.
The expansion of Roman citizenship was a masterstroke of social engineering.
How did it start?
Initially, only people living in the city of Rome itself were citizens. But over centuries, they gradually extended this status.
They didn't just give it away to everyone at once, though.
Yeah. No, it was strategic. They offered it to allied Italian cities, then to provincial elites, and eventually to entire populations. By 212 AD, the Emperor Caracalla granted citizenship to all free men in the empire.
So you could be a Syrian merchant, a Spanish farmer, or a Greek philosopher, and you were legally Roman.
Yes. You had the right to a Roman trial, you were protected by Roman civil law, and you could rise through the ranks of the military or the civil service.
That's huge.
It was. This absorbed diverse, potentially rebellious populations into a larger imperial identity. They didn't have to give up their local culture, but their ultimate loyalty and legal framework belonged to Rome.
That bridges perfectly to the fourth pillar, the cultural and religious identity. Early Rome was aggressively polytheistic, but our source points out it was a highly flexible polytheism.
It was syncretic. The Romans didn't have a rigid, exclusive theology that demanded you abandon your ancestral gods.
So they weren't forcing everyone to just pray to Jupiter.
Well, not exclusively. When they conquered Gaul, they didn't ban the Celtic gods. They just equated them with Roman gods.
Oh, interesting.
They'd say, oh, you're god of thunder. That's just Jupiter. You're god of healing. That's Apollo.
Like a translation matrix for religion.
Exactly. The state religion was less about personal spiritual belief and much more about civic duty.
Civic duty. How so?
As long as you performed the public sacrifices to the emperor and the state gods, you were proving your political loyalty.
It was a loyalty test, not a theology test.
Exactly. Now, this dynamic completely changes later when Christianity becomes the dominant, exclusive state religion, bringing immense cultural shifts.
Right, which we will get into.
But for the first few centuries, that religious flexibility was a core stabilizing factor.
And finally, the fifth pillar, the connective tissue, the infrastructure.
The famous Roman roads.
When you read about this, it feels like looking at a perfectly coded operating system. You got 50,000 miles of paved roads.
50,000. Let that sink in.
It's unbelievable. And aqueducts engineered with such precision, they drop only a few inches per mile to carry fresh water from mountains into urban centers holding 1 million people.
And if we use your operating system metaphor, the roads were the fiber optic cables of the ancient world.
Right, because they weren't just for moving troops.
No, they moved information. The cursus publicus, which was the state courier system, allowed imperial orders to travel up to 50 miles a day.
50 miles a day was basically light speed back then.
It was. It allowed the central processor in Rome to communicate with the peripherals on the frontiers.
And the brilliant part, the absolute core of this first section of the source material, is how these 5 pillars mutually reinforced each other.
They were completely interconnected.
Right. Rome's superpower wasn't just heavy infantry. It was systemic cohesion.
Cohesion is the key word.
If you think about it, the political system creates the laws. The laws protect the economy. The booming economy generates the massive tax revenue.
And the tax revenue pays for the infrastructure and the standing army.
Exactly. And the infrastructure allows the army to move swiftly to protect the economy and enforce the laws. It is a perfectly closed loop of positive reinforcement.
That is the peak. But an engine running that hot with that much complexity requires continuous, perfect alignment.
Because if one thing shifts,
The whole thing starts to rattle. The tragedy of the Western Roman Empire doesn't start with an external invasion. The collapse begins when these highly synchronized systems slowly, imperceptibly, start drifting out of alignment with one another.
that takes us right into the invisible cracks, the pre-collapse strain.
This is where it gets really dark.
Yeah, I want to look at how a system rots from the inside out, starting with the social pressures. Beneath the surface of this unified empire, the wealth inequality was becoming staggering.
It was astronomical.
The source mentions the rise of the latifundia. Walk me through how this gutted the Roman middle class.
To understand the latifundia, you really have to look at the Roman military model first.
Okay.
For a long time, the legions were made up of citizen farmers. These men would leave their small family farms to fight in prolonged campaigns in Spain or Greece.
And campaigns back then weren't just a few weeks.
No, they might be gone for years. While they were away, their farms would fall into ruin, or the families would take on immense debt just to survive.
So they come back from fighting for Rome, and what happens?
When the soldier returned, he was often bankrupt. At the same time, the ultra-wealthy patricians, the senatorial class, were flooded with cash from these exact same conquests.
So the rich get richer from the wars, and the soldiers go broke.
Exactly. So the wealthy elites bought up these bankrupt family farms for pennies on the dollar and consolidated them into mega estates.
Latifundia.
Yes, latifundia. And instead of hiring free Romans to work the land, they used the massive influx of cheap slave labor they had just conquered.
So you have a returning veteran who fought for Rome, and his reward is that he's lost his land.
Yeah,
And he can't even get a job as a farmhand on his own former land because a slave does it for free.
exactly. And this sets off a devastating chain reaction. These dispossessed farmers flood into the cities, particularly Rome, looking for work.
But there are no factories in the ancient world. You can't just go get a factory job.
Right. So they become an unemployed, restless urban mob. To keep them from rioting, the state expands the cura annone, the grain dole.
Welfare, essentially.
Yeah, they start handing out free bread and eventually free olive oil and pork.
Which fundamentally changes the psychology of the citizen.
It completely shifts their relationship to the state.
They go from being active stakeholders in the empire, people who literally owned a piece of it and fought for it, to passive dependents relying on state handouts for survival.
Right, that shared civic identity starts to hollow out.
And it hollowed out the military too, didn't it?
Absolutely, because
Yeah.
you had to own property to be drafted into the early legions. As the small farmers vanished, the recruiting pool for the army vanished with them.
Forcing Rome to rely on alternative, less reliable sources of manpower later on.
Which we will definitely talk about.
Meanwhile, While the middle class is dissolving into a dependent urban class, the top of the political pyramid completely loses its mind.
It was absolute chaos.
The source points to the crisis of the 3rd century. It wasn't just a couple of bad emperors. It was structural chaos.
For about 50 years in the 3rd century, the political system completely broke down.
Why? What happened to the succession?
There was no constitutional mechanism for the peaceful transfer of power. If an emperor died, there was no law saying his son, or the Senate's choice, automatically took over.
So it was just a free-for-all.
Basically. The throne essentially went to whichever general could bribe his army to march on Rome and kill the rivals.
That is terrifying.
During this period, there were over 26 recognized emperors and countless usurpers. Almost all of them were assassinated or died in battle.
Wait, 26 emperors in 50 years?
Yeah.
So, if you're an emperor and your average life expectancy on the throne is maybe 2 years before your own guards stab you, how does that impact governance?
It paralyzes long-term strategy entirely. Governance becomes entirely reactive and focused on short-term survival.
I mean, you wouldn't be planning a 10-year infrastructure project.
Exactly. If you know a rival general in Britain might declare himself emperor next month, you aren't going to invest state funds into repairing the aqueducts in Spain.
You need cash right now.
You are going to take every ounce of silver you have and distribute it as a bonus, a donative to the soldiers physically standing in front of you, just to buy their loyalty for another week.
It institutionalized massive corruption.
The military realized they were the kingmakers, and they extorted the state constantly.
Which bleeds directly into the economic collapse. Because to pay off these massive, bloated, extortionist armies, the state needs money.
Constant streams of money.
But as we established, the economy is struggling. They hit the geographic limits of their expansion. The Atlantic Ocean to the west, the Sahara to the south, the Parthian Empire to the east, and dense forests to the north.
They ran out of easy targets.
Right. Because they aren't conquering new lands, the influx of plundered wealth and new slave labor dries up. So the government does something that feels eerily modern.
Oh, very much.
They start manipulating the currency.
They engaged in severe currency debasement.
Walk me through how they actually did that in the ancient world.
Well, the standard Roman silver coin, the denarius, was originally about 95% pure silver. But as the emperors became increasingly desperate for cash to pay the troops, they started quietly reducing the silver content.
Just skimming a little off the top.
More than a little. They started mixing in cheaper base metals like copper or bronze. By the late 3rd century, a denarius had barely 2% silver in it.
2%.
It was basically a bronze coin with a microscopic silver wash on the outside to make it look shiny.
But the people aren't stupid. I mean, a merchant in a marketplace knows when a coin doesn't weigh right or look right.
Of course they do. And when the public realizes the currency is diluted, they demand more coins for the exact same goods.
That triggers hyperinflation.
Massive hyperinflation. The prices of basic necessities skyrocketed. The government responded by demanding taxes be paid in physical goods, grain, livestock, rather than worthless coins.
Wow, they wouldn't even accept their own money for taxes.
Yeah. Nope. Which crippled the monetary economy and forced people back to a barter system.
I have to push back here, though. We are looking at an empire that engineered the Pantheon, a dome that stood unrivaled for over a millennium.
An architectural masterpiece.
They had brilliant philosophers, mathematicians, architects. If they are facing rampant inflation, wealth inequality, and a labor shortage as the slave supply dries up, why didn't they invent their way out of it?
That's a great question.
Like, why didn't a Roman engineer look at a boiling pot of water and invent a primitive steam engine to automate farming or milling, sparking an ancient industrial revolution?
It is honestly one of the most debated questions in history, and the source text targets it perfectly. It comes down to an economic and technological energy trap.
An energy trap.
The Romans had optimized their existing technology to the absolute maximum, but they lacked the specific economic incentives to trigger an industrial revolution.
Because of the slaves.
Precisely. To invent a steam engine, you need immense capital investment in research, metallurgy, and coal mining.
It takes a lot of upfront risk.
Right. Why would a Roman patrician invest a fortune trying to invent a complex machine to thresh grain when he has thousands of enslaved humans who can do it for essentially the cost of a few calories a day?
Wow. So human misery was literally holding back technological progress.
The abundance of cheap human and animal muscle actively disincentivized the pursuit of labor-saving technology.
That is so dark. but it makes total economic sense for them at the time.
And by the time the slave supply dried up and labor became expensive, the empire was already politically fractured, economically bankrupt, and fighting for its life.
They didn't have the runway to invent a steam engine?
They didn't have the surplus capital or the stability to invent a new energy paradigm. They were stuck with human muscle, animal muscle, and wind.
And that meant the empire's capacity to generate wealth had a hard, unyielding ceiling.
A very hard ceiling.
So they are trapped. And while the economy hits the ceiling, the borders are stretching to the breaking point. The military structure is shifting fundamentally.
The borders were thousands of miles long.
Right? Thousands of miles along the Rhine and Danube rivers. To defend it, they pivot from citizen legions to relying on foederati. Explain what that means and why it's so dangerous.
Foederati were allied, non-Roman mercenary troops, usually Germanic tribes living just outside or right on the borders.
So they weren't even Roman citizens.
No. Rome would strike a treaty. We will give you land, gold, and food, and in return, your warriors will fight for Rome.
It sounds like a quick fix.
Initially, it seemed like a highly pragmatic solution to the manpower shortage. But the mechanism of loyalty was fundamentally altered.
How so?
A traditional Roman legionnaire was loyal to the emperor, the senate, and the abstract concept of Rome. A Germanic foederati warrior was loyal entirely to his specific tribal chieftain who just happened to be cashing a Roman paycheck.
So you are basically outsourcing your national defense to independent armed groups who don't share your cultural identity or your long-term interests.
Exactly.
If the paycheck stops, or if a rival offers a better deal, those troops might turn around and march on you.
Which is exactly what happened, repeatedly. The Roman military became less a tool of state policy and more a loose confederation of armed bands pursuing their own interests.
And as if all the physical reality crumbling wasn't enough, the ideological foundation is fracturing.
Oh, the religious conflicts?
Yeah, this period sees the rise of Christianity, which eventually becomes the state religion. But our source points out that it wasn't just a neat, unifying switch from Jupiter to Jesus.
Not at all. It was incredibly messy.
The theological debates actually crippled state efficiency. I'm looking at the conflict between Arian and Nicene Christians in the text.
Yeah.
Wait, how does a highly abstract theological debate over the nature of the Trinity actually impact border defense?
It sounds absurd to our modern ears, but we have to understand that in late antiquity, theology was politics.
Okay, lay it out for me.
The Arian and Nicene factions fundamentally disagreed on the nature of Christ. Was he subordinate to God the Father or co-equal?
Right, but how does that stop a Gothic invasion?
Because it dictated who you trusted with an army. If an emperor in Constantinople was a staunch Nicene Christian and his top general in Gaul was an Arian Christian, the emperor might view that general not just as a political rival, but as a literal heretic damned by God.
Oh, wow. So you wouldn't trust him to defend the border.
The emperor might withhold funding, refuse to send reinforcements during a barbarian raid, or even instigate a civil war purely over theological purity.
When the empire desperately needed unified, pragmatic leadership to face external threats, its leaders were actively sabotaging each other over doctrinal disputes.
The glue of the empire, a shared civic reality, just dissolved into factionalism.
If we synthesize all these internal cracks, the latifundia gutting the middle class, the political assassinations paralyzing long-term planning, hyperinflation destroying the economy, mercenaries replacing citizens, and religious factionalism dividing the leadership, a terrifying pattern emerges.
It's the compounding effect.
Right. None of these issues, isolated in a vacuum, would have destroyed the Western Roman Empire. But compounding simultaneously, they created a massive misalignment.
It's all about alignment.
It makes me think of driving a car where the suspension is shot, the alignment is completely off, and the engine is misfiring.
Sounds like my first car.
Right. But if you are driving on a perfectly smooth road at 20 miles an hour, you can still steer the car. You might feel a little rattling, but you get from point A to point B. The problem is, you are assuming the road will always be smooth.
But the road was about to get unimaginably rough.
Which brings us to the match and the powder keg, the external stressors. Because Rome had limped along with these internal misalignments for decades.
They managed it for a long time.
But the outside world isn't static. The source brings up environmental and biological pressures that acted as massive external shocks.
Right, the climate and the diseases.
We see evidence of a cooling climate. But the real devastating blows were biological. Plagues.
Specifically, the Antonine Plague in the late 2nd century, which was likely smallpox or measles, and the plague of Cyprian in the 3rd century, which might have been a viral hemorrhagic fever.
And these diseases just tore through the interconnected Roman world.
Because the very infrastructure that made them great, the roads, the trade ships, acted as a superhighway for the pathogens.
The same ships bringing the grain are bringing the rats and the viruses.
Exactly. The density of Roman cities made them viral incubators. Estimates suggest the Antonine Plague killed up to 10 to 20% of the empire's population.
20%.
In an ancient agrarian economy, human beings are your economic capacity. When you lose 15 or 20% of your population, you lose that percentage of your farmers.
Fields just go unharvested.
Tax revenues plummet. You lose a huge chunk of your military-age males, leaving the borders critically understaffed.
Yeah.
It hollowed out the state's capacity to generate wealth and project power.
So the empire is weakened, underpopulated, and economically frail. And then the domino effect begins on the geopolitical stage.
Here come the Huns.
Far out in the steppes of Central Asia, a nomadic confederation known as the Huns begins moving west. We always hear about the Huns, but the source text makes a crucial distinction about how their movement actually affected Rome.
Yeah, this is often misunderstood.
The Huns didn't just ride up to the walls of Rome right away, did they? Their movement displaced other peoples.
The Huns were highly mobile, incredibly lethal mounted archers. As they pushed westward toward Eastern Europe, they crashed into the various Germanic tribes living north of the Danube River, primarily the Goths.
So they pushed the Goths out of their homes.
And this is vital to understand. What happened next was not initially a coordinated military invasion of the Roman Empire. It was a massive, desperate refugee crisis.
A refugee crisis. That changes the framing entirely.
The Goths were terrified. They gathered their families, their wagons, their livestock, and they fled to the banks of the Danube, which was the Roman border.
Seeking safety.
In 376 AD, an estimated 100,000 or more Gothic refugees stood on the riverbank, begging the Roman authorities for asylum. They promised to farm the land and fight for Rome if they were just allowed to cross.
And what did Rome do? The Emperor Valens agrees to let them cross. Right.
He does. But the way the Roman provincial bureaucracy handles this migration is just a masterclass in catastrophic corruption.
It is a textbook example of systemic failure.
The local Roman commanders, notably a man named Lupicinus, were supposed to provide the refugees with food and land.
The state sent funds for that, didn't they?
They did. But instead, these commanders embezzled the funds provided by the state and exploited the starving refugees. The corruption was so vile that Roman soldiers were literally trading dog meat to the Goths in exchange for their children whom they enslaved.
Trading dog meat for children, that is just horrific.
It's pure evil.
Yeah.
And they pushed a desperate armed population into a corner.
And they exploded.
The Goths revolted. They began pillaging the countryside just to survive. This culminated 2 years later, in 378 AD, at the Battle of Adrianople.
This is a huge turning point.
Emperor Valens marched an army to crush the rebellion. But due to poor scouting, exhaustion, and Valens's own hubris, he actually refused to wait for reinforcements because he wanted all the glory for himself. The Roman field army was annihilated by Gothic cavalry.
Annihilate.
Tens of thousands of elite Roman soldiers were slaughtered, and Emperor Valens himself was killed on the battlefield.
An emperor dead on the field. That is a psychological shockwave.
It shattered the myth of Roman invincibility.
And it sets the stage for the ultimate symbols of the fall.
Hmm.
The city of Rome itself is sacked by the Visigoths under Alaric in 410 AD, and then again by the Vandals in 455 AD.
The physical breaching of the Eternal City.
Here's where it gets really interesting for you listening. As the source notes point out, Rome had been sacked before.
Back in the Republic days.
Right. Back in 390 BC, the Gauls burned the city. The Romans bounced back, rebuilt, and conquered the known world. They had survived plagues before. Why did these specific events in the 4th and 5th centuries break the empire when earlier disasters didn't?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the answer unlocks the core reality of all systemic collapse.
Okay, let's hear it.
The external stressors, the Huns, the Goths, the plagues, they did not destroy a strong, robust system. They exposed a system that had completely exhausted its resilience.
It's the immunocompromised body analogy.
Exactly. Think of a healthy human body. If a healthy person catches a severe cold, their immune system mounts a defense. They might be bedridden with a fever for a wind, but their body has the cellular reserves to fight it off, repair the tissue, and recover.
You bounce back.
Now imagine a body that is severely immunocompromised. It's malnourished, sleep-deprived, and suffering from internal organ failure.
Like the Roman Empire at this point.
That exact same cold virus isn't just an inconvenience, it is fatal. The virus didn't magically get stronger. The host lost the capacity to absorb the shock.
Rome in 378 AD was the immunocompromised body.
In the Republic era, if an army was destroyed, the social cohesion was so strong they would just draft new citizen soldiers, melt down their jewelry to fund the war, and march back out.
They had the political will to do it.
By the 5th century, there was no money, no willing citizens, and no political unity to mount a recovery. The invasions were simply the final pathogens attacking a host that could no longer heal itself.
That leads directly into Section 4, the mechanics of the collapse itself. How does a massive society actually wind down?
It's a grim process.
Source maps this out, and it's terrifyingly logical. It's a self-reinforcing feedback loop, a doom loop.
Let's trace the causality.
Yeah.
Start with the external raids and the loss of territory. When the Vandals take over North Africa, Rome loses its primary source of grain and a massive chunk of its tax base.
Right, so less tax revenue means the state literally cannot pay the army.
Exactly. When the army isn't paid, they either mutiny, desert, or transition into local bandits.
Just shaking down the locals.
That means the borders are porous, and more importantly, the interior roads and shipping lanes are no longer policed.
So the merchants stop moving goods because they know they'll be robbed. Trade dries up.
When trade dries up, local economies collapse. Cities can't get imported food, so the urban populations either starve or abandon the cities to go find work on the rural estates of the wealthy warlords.
Which further shrinks the tax base, completing the cycle and spinning the loop faster.
But the source highlights that underneath this physical economic loop, the most dangerous collapse was invisible.
The total collapse of public trust.
Yes.
Let's talk about the bank run analogy, because when I read this, it clicked perfectly. In a modern economy, a bank doesn't actually have all the cash in the vault to pay every depositor at once.
Right, no. It's all leverage.
The system only works because of a shared collective illusion.
Yeah.
Everyone trusts that if they need their money, it will be there.
Trust is the only currency that matters.
But the second a rumor starts that the bank is failing, the trust evaporates. People panic and run to the bank to withdraw their cash. And it's precisely their defensive, panic-driven actions that drain the vault and cause the bank to collapse.
The fear of collapse creates the collapse.
It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
That is exactly what happened to the Roman infrastructure, just on a societal scale. The Roman system required participation. It required local elites to volunteer for city councils, collect taxes, and maintain the public baths. It required farmers to send their grain to the market.
But they stopped doing it.
As the crisis deepened, people realized the emperor in Ravenna or Rome couldn't protect them from Gothic raids. They realized the judges were entirely corrupt, so they withdrew their participation.
Defensive actions.
Wealthy elites hid their gold and refused to serve in government. Farmers hoarded their crops. People stopped acting like Romans and started acting like survivors.
The roads were still physically paved. The aqueducts were still standing. But they stopped functioning as a unified network because the collective belief that animated them had vanished.
The citizens initiated a societal bank run.
That brings us to Section 5, the lived experience. Because we are sitting here talking about centuries of macroeconomic shifts, but what did this actually feel like to a regular person living through it?
The psychological landscape of the collapse is incredibly eerie. It defies our modern apocalyptic expectations.
Right, there was no public announcement. There was no single day where an official stood in the forum and declared, "Attention citizens, the Western Roman Empire has fallen."
No one sent out a push notification.
Life just became gradually more uncertain, more local, and more defensive. But people maintained their routines.
They had to.
You still woke up, you still went to the fields. The local market still happened on Tuesdays. It's just that instead of buying pottery from North Africa and spices from the East, you were only trading for turnips grown by the guy 3 villages over.
The scope of your world just shrank.
And the laws still technically existed on parchment, even if the local magistrate was just taking bribes. There is a psychological concept the source introduces here called normalcy bias.
Normalcy bias is a profound cognitive anchor. It is the human brain's deeply ingrained assumption that things will just continue the way they always have.
We assume the future will look like the recent past.
Because daily life continues, Because the sun still rises and you can still bake bread, even if the wheat costs twice as much, the structural decline is completely masked to the individual.
People interpret systemic failure as just a temporary rough patch.
Oh, the emperor is just having a bad decade with the Goths. We'll bounce back.
It is the ancient equivalent of the dog sitting in a burning room saying, "This is fine."
And the state propaganda machine actively fed this delusion.
Heavily. While the empire was literally dissolving, the imperial mints were producing coins with slogans like Restitutor Orbis
Restorer of the world.
or Invicta Roma, unconquered Rome.
Because information traveled at the speed of a horse or a sailing ship, there was a massive disconnect between the official narrative and the reality on the ground.
If you lived in an isolated valley in central Italy, you might not even realize the central government was powerless until a vandal raiding party showed up on your doorstep.
Collapse was generational at the macro level. It took 300 years, but it was sudden at the micro level.
For your specific town, the collapse happened on a random Tuesday when the trade caravan never arrived, or the day the local Roman garrison marched away and never came back.
This raises an important question. How do we, in our own modern lives or in our own societies, distinguish between a temporary cyclical crisis and a structural, irreversible collapse?
That is the haunting question. Because when you're in it, it just feels like the news is bad.
And the sobering answer the source provides is this. By the time a structural collapse is completely obvious to everyone, when the normalcy bias shatters, it is usually far too late to reverse it.
Okay, we need to take a breath and pivot slightly. Because to really grasp what this all means, we have to do some myth-busting.
Yes, let's clear the air.
There are a lot of stubborn ideas about the fall of Rome that the text dismantles. We have 4 major myths. Let's go through them. Myth number 1. The fall was caused by one single thing. You always hear, it was the lead pipes making them crazy, or it was Christianity making them pacifists.
We've thoroughly debunked that. Seeking a single cause for the collapse of a complex system is a fool's errand. It wasn't just lead poisoning or inflation or barbarians. It was a cascading multi-system failure, a compounding misalignment.
Myth number 2. Rome collapsed suddenly in the year 476 AD.
476 AD is purely a symbolic, highly convenient date for textbook publishers.
What actually happened that year?
That is the year a Germanic mercenary general named Odoster walked into Ravenna and deposed the teenage emperor Romulus Augustulus.
But he didn't destroy the empire that day.
No, Odoacer didn't burn the city. He basically just sent a letter to the Eastern Emperor saying, "We don't need a Western Emperor anymore. I'll manage Italy for you."
Just a change in management.
The empire had been functionally dead for a century. Life on September 5th, 476, didn't look noticeably different to a farmer in Gaul than life on September 3rd.
Myth number 3. The barbarians were savages who wanted to destroy civilization.
This is a massive moralized narrative we inherited from Roman writers who were incredibly biased against outsiders.
The Romans were basically just calling them uncultured.
Right. The Germanic tribes, the Goths, Franks, Vandals, didn't hate Roman civilization. They admired it. They wanted to participate in its wealth, its baths, its security.
They wanted to be Romans.
Exactly. When they took power, they didn't try to eradicate Roman systems. They actually tried to preserve Roman law, administration, and titles. They wanted to be the new managers of the estate, not the demolishers.
Which leads right into myth number 4. The fall was a purely catastrophic event where all light and learning vanished into the Dark Ages.
We cannot minimize the human suffering. It was bad.
Yeah, the population drops for severe.
Urban populations plummeted. Rome went from 1 million people to perhaps 30,000. Literacy rates crashed. Long-distance trade vanished.
But it wasn't the end of the world.
No, it was not a deletion of civilization. It was a massive, agonizing transformation. It was the messy birth of medieval Europe.
I love how the text frames this idea of transformation. Collapse isn't just destruction. It's what happens when a system can no longer sustain its massive level of complexity.
It requires too much energy.
Right, too much coordination to keep the Mediterranean integrated. So the system decomposes, but then it recombines into something simpler.
Exactly. Power shifted dramatically. Instead of a centralized emperor in a distant capital, power localized.
How did that look on the ground?
If you were a farmer facing a raid, you didn't send a letter to the emperor. You walked up the hill to the local wealthy landowner who had a stone villa and a private retinue of armed guards.
And you made a deal.
You said, "I will give you a portion of my crops and I will tie my family to your land if you let us hide behind your walls when the raiders come."
That is the literal origin of the feudal system. Serfs, lords, and castles.
Yes. The system scaled down. It moved from a massively complex, fragile, energy-intensive network to a smaller, fragmented, but highly resilient local structure.
And identity shifted too.
You stopped thinking of yourself as a Roman citizen and started identifying with your immediate geographic region, or most powerfully, with your religion.
Because the Catholic Church was the last man standing, so to speak.
The Christian Church stepped into the power vacuum, becoming the unifying trans-regional institution that preserved literacy, administration, and a shared cultural framework across Europe.
Okay, listener, if you're still with us, I need you to prepare to have your mind absolutely blown.
This is the best part.
Because everything we just talked about, the supply chains, the inflation, the emperors, the collapse of trust, the shift to simpler systems, the author of this 2026 document takes all of those historical mechanics and pivots to apply them to the internal psychological systems of an individual human being.
It is a brilliant pivot.
Section 7 is called the inner Rome, the subpersonality lens.
This is truly where the source text elevates from an excellent historical analysis into a profound psychological framework.
The author uses a cast of 10 distinct subpersonalities, right?
Yeah, archetypal parts of a person's psyche, and they use them to map how an internal personal breakdown perfectly mirrors the fall of an empire.
Let's ground this so it's not just abstract theory. I want to apply these subpersonalities to a very specific, highly relatable scenario. Let's imagine someone who's been in a demanding, high-status career for 15 years.
Okay, let's say a corporate lawyer or a startup founder or a surgeon.
Perfect. For a decade, that career was their peak Roman Empire. It provided money, status, identity. It worked.
The systems were aligned.
But slowly, internal misalignment started compounding. The hours are ruining their health. The industry is changing. The passion is gone. The system is failing, but they are terrified to let it go. Let's walk through the cast of characters inside their head as this internal empire collapses.
We start with Bannock, the stabilizer.
Bannock is the late Roman emperor. Bannock is the voice in your head saying, if I just drink more coffee, if I just sleep 4 hours a night, if I just white-knuckle this next quarter, I can hold this entire life together.
Bannock is operating on pure reaction. He believes that his entire job is to prevent the collapse at all costs.
He's the guy holding the pillars up with his bare hands.
But the profound lesson Bannock has to learn is that he cannot reverse systemic failure with mere willpower. A fundamentally broken career cannot be saved by answering emails at 2 a.m.
So what does Bannock have to do?
Bannock learns that his true role isn't to prevent the inevitable collapse, but to step back and intentionally guide the psyche through the transition. He has to shift from a desperate controller to a wise steward of the ruins.
Next is Val, the system builder. When the career starts feeling overwhelming, Val is the part that responds by trying to optimize.
Val loves optimization.
Val says, the problem isn't the job. The problem is my time management. If I download a new productivity app, if I time block my calendar in 15-minute increments, if I optimize my morning routine, I can fix this.
But just like Rome couldn't invent a steam engine to fix its fundamentally flawed slave economy, Val faces diminishing returns.
You cannot optimize a system that is structurally toxic.
Val has to realize that some systems eventually stop responding to optimization. More effort no longer guarantees success.
It's a hard pill to swallow for the type A personality.
Oh, absolutely. The painful but liberating breakthrough for Val is learning that not every system in your life is meant to be perfected forever. Some systems, no matter how well they served you in the past, are meant to be outgrown.
That is so powerful. Some systems are meant to be outgrown.
Yeah, we have Kenny, the architect.
Kenny is the analytical part. Kenny looks at the reality of this career, the sheer math of the stress versus the reward, and sees the logic breaking.
Kenny is crunching the numbers.
Kenny says, wait, I am trading my physical health and my relationships for a marginal increase in a retirement account I might not live to enjoy. This equation is failing.
And right alongside Kenny's logic is Kelly, the emotional core.
They work together, right?
While Kenny analyzes the math, Kelly feels the visceral human cost. Kelly feels the exhaustion in your bones. Kelly feels the panic attacks, the burnout, the deep lack of care and nourishment in this lifestyle.
The required shift for Kenny and Kelly is moving away from trusting rigid, abstract systems.
Like the belief that if I just follow this corporate ladder perfectly, I will be fulfilled.
And pivoting toward adaptive frameworks and personal relationship-centered care.
Then you have Devin, the realist.
Devin is the part that finally cuts through the normalcy bias.
Devin looks at the collapsing career and says, this isn't just a tough month. This isn't a temporary rough patch. This is irreversible structural failure.
Devin is the part of you that lets go of the desperate hope that things will magically go back to normal.
Devin realizes that finding brutal clarity is far more valuable than clinging to the hollow comfort of the old, failing structure.
And as that central structure weakens, we meet Liz, the individual.
Liz is fascinating.
In the peak of the empire, your entire identity was, I am a corporate lawyer. You were defined by the massive system. But as that system breaks down, Liz is the part that realizes, wait, if I am not my job title, who am I?
Liz actually thrives in the collapse.
She gains autonomy. She realizes that when the massive oppressive system shrinks, individual independence can actually grow.
But once you admit the old career is over, you need somewhere to go. You are standing in the rubble. That brings in Addie, the explorer.
When the map of your old life disappears, Addie doesn't panic. Addie gets intensely curious. Addie steps into the uncertainty with flexibility, asking, what else is out there?
And Tommy, the rebuilder.
I absolutely love Tommy. Once the old structures dissolve, Tommy looks at the remnants of your skills and experiences and says, okay, we aren't going to rebuild the exact same stressful empire, but we have all these great raw materials.
Tommy asks, what new, sustainable thing can we build from the rubble? Tommy is grounded in reality.
Finally, we have the two parts that sustain the human spirit through the agonizing process of change. Tira, the meaning maker.
Tira accepts that change, decay, and collapse are fundamental laws of the universe. No job, no relationship, no empire is perfectly permanent.
But Tira understands that your core meaning can persist and transform through the collapse.
And Mac, the morale keeper.
Mac is the part of you cracking a joke while you pack up your office desk for the last time.
Mac brings the dark humor. Not as a toxic coping mechanism to avoid the reality of the failure, but as a vital tool to survive the emotional weight of it. Joy doesn't deny the collapse, it helps carry you through it.
If we synthesize this beautiful psychological mirror, it is a revelation. Just like the Western Roman Empire, our internal systems, our coping mechanisms, our identities inevitably drift out of alignment as we age and as the world changes. The internal pressures build up.
But here is the profound, crucial difference. Unlike an ancient agrarian empire, your internal system have conscious awareness.
You representing the integrated self can actually step back, look at your life, and realize the system is failing.
You do not have to wait for the metaphorical Visigoths to kick down your door and sack your city.
You have agency. You can consciously choose to stop forcing the old exhausting structure to hold together and intentionally begin the work of decomposing it and building a new, simpler, more authentic structure.
It's an incredibly empowering way of view failure.
We have covered so much ground today. From the fiber optic network of Roman roads, to the latifundia getting the middle class, to the hyperinflation of the denarius, the terrifying refugee crisis on the Danube, the collapse of societal trust, and finally, the subpersonalities warring inside our own heads.
It's been a massive journey.
But if we pull it all together, the journey we've just taken comes down to this core truth. Rome didn't fall because it faced a couple of bad storms. It fell because its internal systems became so profoundly misaligned that it could no longer move as one coordinated ship.
When the storms came, it had no resilience left to weather them.
So what does this all mean? It means that studying history isn't just an academic exercise in categorizing the past.
It's about acquiring a diagnostic tool.
Right, to understand the incredibly complex systems we navigate every single day. We are surrounded by complex systems in our geopolitics, in our macroeconomy, in our local communities, and most intimately in the psychological architecture of our own minds. Understanding how they align and how they fail is the key to navigating a chaotic world.
I want to leave you with a final thought from the text to mull over as you go about your day. Think about a complex system in your own life right now.
It could be a demanding daily habit, a strained relationship dynamic, a creative project that feels stuck, or a career path that is draining you.
Are you playing the role of Bannock, exhausting yourself, trying to maintain a complex structure that has already lost its resilience?
What if you stop trying to prevent its collapse?
What if you let the normalcy bias shatter, embrace the reality of the decline, and instead started looking at the remnants, your skills, your passions, your core values, to see what new, simpler, more resilient thing you are actually meant to build next?
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you, keep looking for the misalignments, and remember, Sometimes the diagnostic X-ray is murky.
Sometimes the jagged line isn't obvious because the bones aren't cleanly broken. They are just slowly shifting under immense pressure.
You're looking at a fading picture of an old, exhausted structure. But the beautiful part of being human is, once you recognize the collapse, you get to decide how to build the next one.